And this is where we are now. This is how we've rebuilt our newsroom in Paris around the context of live. We work in a world of live now. This dominates what we do. The other context that dominates everything that we do is social media. And those two things together define day to day the complexity of how we work, where the conversation is loud, it's intense, it's difficult to control, and above all, it is driven by the image, not by the word. And this is just a little graphic just to show you the development of what we've done probably over the last 20 years, starting when we started to develop international photo around the world. You'll see that almost everything we've done since 1985 has been visual-led, away from the word, culminating in intense activity really at this last few years into new formats, into live blogging, into live video, into interactive graphics, into 360 degrees photo and video, and into data visualization. There's an intense movement towards the image, which has an enormous impact on the way we gather news and the way we present news. And this is just a little example, which is from, I think, March the 24th, which was Earth Hour. On that day, there was major news around the world. Trump was doing what he normally does. There was the war in Syria was carrying on. There was an intense period. Yeah, when we looked that day, what was our most used photos around the world were all to do with Earth Hour and images from Dubai, from other kind of locations, from Sydney and so on. And that was because the power of the image was stronger than the power of just the day news flow. There were more downloads and more client use of those Earth Hour images than any other news story that day. And here's a little example, which is, some of you might have seen this, which is a young Afghan lady, a photo taken by her professor as she was studying for her exams. The photo went viral on social media. She became the story. She became a story, and again, on that day, these images used more than any other image that we moved that day from every global story around the world, showing you the power of social media, the power of the telephone, and the impact that has on the news cycle, and also the power of big themes like education, women's rights, and so on. As previously, everybody used to think you were interested in countries. Were you interested in Afghanistan? That's not the question. Are you interested in visual news? Are you interested in these big themes? And the answer from the consumer or from the news readers around the world is yes. And that's a big change again on the way we work. And as I'm talking about the telephone, we're talking therefore about user-generated content, about eyewitness media. This, for me, was one of the key moments where we realized at AFP how significant that everybody around the world has a telephone in their pocket and will take images. This is the attack on Charlie Hebdo's offices in Paris in January 2015. This office is probably about 2 kilometers away from AFP's headquarters, where we have 600 journalists. So you'd think there'd be a story that really we're going to be totally dominating. This is the image that dominated every single front page all over the world that day, which was a UGC image shot by a young Spanish man who was living in the apartment opposite, who took these terrible images of the gunman killing a policeman on the ground. And at that point, we realized we'd entered a whole different world where everything that we do, there's an eyewitness to. And that is going to be part of our job. It's not going to replace what we do, but that's going to be part of the job. There's an intimacy to every news event because there is an eyewitness to absolutely everything that happens, meaning images that drive effectively what we do. And carries on. This is, some of you may remember this terrible fire in London a few months ago. This is just another example of really how it's influenced the way we do. There is somebody in a nearby tower block who took very early a series of 7 or 8 photos with her mobile phone. Again, our editors are in touch with them to source and to verify those images. We moved those images out. And again, we had hundreds and hundreds of images taken by professional photographers and also complement these taken by amateur photographers. And again, because it's so fast, past. And because it's intimate and because it's so near, these were the images that day that were used more than any other images we moved that day. Again, it plays a role in the way that we do our news nowadays. Syria is a really good example. This is a selection of images from our network of photographers taken over the last few weeks in Utah. This is something that none of these people were journalists 5 or 6 years ago. These are people that we worked with over 5 or 6 years to train, to understand the way we work, to create journalists, and also tell stories in places where you couldn't always tell a story. The images speak for themselves, but it also explains how, in the current environment in which we work, we have the capacity, through images, to tell stories that we couldn't before. All you need is access to the internet, all you need is a connection, all you need, at the simplest level, is a mobile phone or some material. And as a result, the reality is you can tell stories in a tremendous, powerful way, and you can reach people you never thought that you could reach. And if you take the comparison between our storytelling in Syria and, of course, what happened in Syria in the 80s with Hafez al-Assad's assault on Hama, when thousands of people died, and there was really no word of that for weeks. The first things that came out after several weeks were several paragraphs, and they started to filter out, but there were never any images that came with it. And what you can say about what's going on now on both sides, on the rebel side, on the government side, and so on, is journalists there now are documenting everything. And these photos are incredibly well used. We can see around the world how these photos are used. They're incredibly well downloaded. They're watched by people around the world because they are incredibly strong photos. And this touches also a little bit on the way that we have changed the way we work now. Everything is visual-led, but everybody has to understand how we work. Everybody does everything. We work in a world of live, as I said before, and we work in a world where the live video feed can turn into the key photo grab. Or we work in a world that every single photographer who works for AFP has to be thinking, hang on, I could be the only photographer in the police helicopter above Paris at the moment when millions have come to the street to protest. I'm not just going to shoot photos, I'm also going to shoot videos, because that is medium in which I need to tell my story. And that's what we're trying to roll out across the agency. We're trying to roll out a culture where everybody understands the different mediums in which we work, that everybody is a multimedia journalist, everybody is a visual journalist, and that's important for us. We have 150 full-time video journalists. We have a images shot in her a blog which tells the stories that our photographers and video journalists and other journalists write about their image. And what does that mean? We're now telling stories in the first person, where people are recounting what they are seeing. And they're recounting the images they are seeing, and they are driven by the image. And this is having a tremendous impact on the way we write and present stories. The way our writing now is much more visual. It's much more written around the images. And it's only going to become more like that as we develop. The blogs are probably the most extreme part, because often they're written in the first person, but it's influencing all our writing on every story, every day. And we're finding new ways, new formats to tell stories. The ability now, for example, to tell a story via interactive graphic. This is the biggest refugee camp in the world on the border between Bangladesh and Myanmar. And here, we're using drones, very simple. You're also using photographers that are geotagging the people that they're shooting in the different parts of the refugee camp. And what we can do, we can pull it together, and we can tell the stories of individual people, and behind that, how they're living their life there, in a way that is much more attractive, a way that is much more approachable than before. One of the key areas that's important in the modern world is to explain. Everybody wants us to explain everything. We have so many more formats now to explain how things work. This is a little piece looking inside France's presidential palace. What happens where? We're using 360-degree photos, and we're using our own animated graphics to take the reader inside and explain where decisions are made, how things work. Interactive graphics, again, another key way of telling stories. This is just very, very simple, looking at the different Korean missiles and how far they can stretch, what comes under target. This works on mobile. It's very simple, but it also works, and it's essential to try and understand how the Korean story is evolving. I already mentioned a little bit the impact of drones, and we're just really at the beginning of seeing the impact that this can have in sort of visual storytelling. There are obviously different legislation, different countries, which means it's either easy or difficult to do this. This is an example here from the Mexico earthquake. And again, what I can tell you is that every single time we use drones, every single time we bring another angle to a story, be it war in Syria, be it an earthquake, be it a sporting event, you bring something new to the table, and you can see every time you're engaging a much bigger audience. These are always amongst our most used content every time we have good images, because they're providing something that provides context, an explanation, and that's ultimately what the digital reader wants. The digital reader wants everything explained and put into context. The same with 360 photos. This is a little the early days of the Trump, just before Trump was handing over to Obama. It's just a photo format of 360s, but puts Trump and Obama together. You understand that photo so much better by seeing the scene around. It explains things that you would need perhaps a whole series of photos to explain. Between 360 photos and 360 videos. Something increasingly that we will do more of. The concept of swimming, for example, used to be pretty dull. It used to be basically, you would just see people swimming on top, or people diving in the water. It was a very one-dimensional thing. One of the things we'd have to do increasingly is that innovation allows us to tell stories in a different way and from different angles. We pioneered very much the taking of underwater photos with all these cameras at the bottom of the pool, which gives us a completely different view on the world of this. This is diving, but swimming, and so on. And we're taking that logic to everything. We're taking that logic now to video, to overhead. This is from the London Olympics. We first started using overhead cameras because ultimately we wanted to put photographers on the roof. We wanted to put photographers in different places, but we weren't allowed to do that. So what we've developed instead is interactive cameras in the top of the stadium, in different locations, and so on, to get a different angle on it. And again, you're bringing in a new audience. You're bringing in a much more dynamic way of looking at things. With that too, you're bringing in astonishing sense of speed now. When we photograph, for example, the 100 meters final in the Olympics, we have more than 25 different cameras, 5 photographers, but the battle is to tell the story as quickly as possible. The first photo now after Bolt won Olympics, the first photo on a client site now would be 42 seconds with a caption, and that's already on a client site after the end of the race, which is almost faster now, the speed of the word. So again, that's changing the way that a viewer can see what we do, and it's changing their interaction with an event like this. And probably within 3 to 5 minutes, you would have a whole series of images that tell the story of Bolt's victory, as you just saw on the screen there. The complexities for us in this world of visuals, there are 2 main complexities that we identify in particular, is the difficulty of both the reader and journalists of the interaction, extremely difficult visual content day after day after day. It's having a tremendous impact on our editing teams, having a tremendous impact on our journalists' images. Actually, it's having a tremendous impact on the readers around the world who are interacting with difficult content in a way that they have not done so before. And the final issue, which I know is something everybody will talk about a great deal at this meeting, is the battle against what we call so-called fake news, the battle against misinformation. And it's there, the image is really probably the strong a battle than the word, because it's all about taking things out of context. There's the manipulation of images, but above all, it's about taking things out of context. And this is a very good example from the elections in France. This was supposed to be an immigrant being beaten up in a hospital in France. In actual fact, it's not. It's a drunk person in a hospital in Russia beating up a nurse. But this was used in elections across Europe in multiple countries to illustrate that immigrants were bringing trouble to countries in Europe, which shared millions and millions and millions of times in different markets. And increasingly, our work is to debunk that, to work to explain things that were